You are standing barefoot on hot arena sand, holding a wooden sword that would struggle to threaten a loaf of bread. Across from you, an iron gate begins to rise. The crowd leans forward. You hear chains, claws, and an animal breathing in the darkness. Somewhere above, a Roman official checks the schedule. Apparently, your death is the lunchtime entertainment. That was the Roman approach to punishment. It was not enough to hurt you. The pain had to teach a lesson, impress the crowd, and remind everyone who owned the city, the law, and probably the nearest lion. Roman punishment depended heavily on who you were. A citizen might receive a cleaner death, such as beheading. A slave, rebel, foreigner, deserter, or poor criminal could expect something slower and far more public. The rules were simple. The higher your status, the faster the executioner worked. The most famous Roman punishment was crucifixion. The idea was older than Rome, but the Romans turned it into a terrifying public system. Crucifixion was usually reserved for slaves, rebels, pirates, and non-citizens. Roman citizens were generally protected from it because even Rome had standards. Low standards, but standards. The condemned person was often whipped first. Then he might be forced to carry the wooden crossbeam through the streets while guards pushed him toward the execution site. The upright post could already be waiting there, used again and again. Rome believed in recycling. The arms were tied or nailed to the beam. The feet might also be fixed in place. There was no single universal method. Executioners could change the position and the way the victim was attached. Once raised, the condemned person was left exposed to heat, cold, insects, thirst, and the eyes of passing strangers. Death could take hours or even days. Breathing became harder as the body weakened. If the guards wanted the process finished sooner, they could break the victim's legs, removing the support needed to push upward and breathe. Sometimes the body was removed. Sometimes it was left hanging to decay. Above it, a sign could name the crime. The message was not subtle. This is what happens when someone like you challenges someone like us. After the revolt led by Spartacus was crushed in 71 BC, ancient accounts say roughly 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way between Capua and Rome. Imagine traveling toward the capital and seeing cross after cross beside the road for miles. Rome did not simply defeat the rebellion. It turned the road into an advertisement. But crucifixion was slow, and the Roman public also enjoyed variety. That brings us back to the arena. Condemnation to the beasts, known as decimation ad bestias, placed prisoners in amphitheaters with wild animals. Lions are the famous choice. But Romans also used leopards, bears, bulls, boars, and other animals imported from across the empire. Sometimes the prisoner was chained and helpless. Sometimes he was given a weapon, creating the exciting illusion that this was a fair contest. It was not. Giving a terrified man a spear and releasing a hungry leopard is less a sporting event and more a cruel administrative joke. The executions could be staged as scenes from mythology. A condemned person might be dressed as a legendary figure whose story ended with burning, mauling, or some other unpleasant miracle. The audience recognized the costume and watched a real death inside the performance. There was one practical problem. Wild animals are not actors. They do not understand schedules, myths, or ticket sales. Some froze in front of the noise. Others avoided the prisoner. Handlers starved, provoked, or trained them to make the show work. And somehow, the Romans found a punishment involving animals that was even more bizarre. For the murder of a parent or close relative, a crime called parricide, Roman law could impose the punishment of the sack, or poena culae. The condemned person was beaten, sewn into a leather sack, and thrown into water. Later descriptions say the sack could also contain animals: a dog, a rooster, a snake, and a monkey. Now, this detail is repeated everywhere. The problem is that the evidence changes across time. Early accounts do not always include the full collection of animals. Different periods use different versions, and the complete combination may have been rare. Which makes sense. Finding a murderer was one problem. Finding a cooperative monkey, snake, rooster, and dog on execution morning was another. The basic idea was still horrifying. The criminal was denied a normal burial and cut off from the earth, the heir and the family he had betrayed. Rome wanted the death to feel unnatural because the crime was considered unnatural. For traitors, Rome had the Tarpeian Rock. This was a steep cliff on the Capitoline Hill. Convicted traitors could be thrown from it. The fall was public, fast, and loaded with meaning. You were not simply killed. You were cast out from the heart of Rome itself. The cliff stood near places connected with Roman government and religion. One moment, you were looking across the city. The next, the city had removed you from the conversation. Not every punishment was aimed at civilians. Roman soldiers had their own nightmare, decimation. When a unit fled, mutinied, or failed badly enough, commanders could divide the men into groups of 10. Lots were drawn. One man in each group was selected, and the other 9 were ordered to beat him to death with clubs or stones. The victim might not have been the man who ran first. He might have fought bravely. Randomness was the point. Every soldier became responsible for the behavior of everyone around him. The survivors could then receive reduced rations, often barley instead of wheat, and be forced to sleep outside the camp. Congratulations! You survived killing your friend, and your reward was worse food and no tent. Decimation was rare because destroying 10% of your own unit is a poor staffing plan. But commanders used it when they wanted soldiers to fear Roman discipline more than the enemy. Rome also punished people by sending them somewhere they might wish they had been executed. Condemnation to the mines, or damnatio ad metalla, meant forced labor in brutal conditions. Prisoners worked underground, chained, poorly fed, breathing dust, swinging tools in darkness, and wearing themselves down for imperial profit. This was not a dramatic death in front of a cheering crowd. It was slower. Your name disappeared. Your body weakened. The mine took your strength one day at a time. Others went to gladiator schools or public labor. A sentence could turn a human being into property, entertainment, or machinery with a heartbeat. Rome was very efficient at making punishment pay for itself. Burning alive was another public option, especially for people considered dangerous, dishonorable, or useful as examples. In some cases, condemned prisoners wore flammable clothing or were tied to stakes. The Emperor Nero was accused by Roman writers of using Christians as living torches after the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64. Those accounts were written by hostile sources, and some details may have been shaped by rumor or political hatred. But execution by fire was real, and public spectacle was never far away. The worst part of Roman punishment was not one cross, one beast, one cliff, or one sack. It was the planning. Officials selected the place. Workers built the stage. Guards moved the prisoner. Vendors sold food. Families brought children. The crowd waited for the next act. Violence became a schedule. Rome did not invent cruelty. Every ancient society could be brutal. But Rome was unusually skilled at turning cruelty into government, theater, military discipline, and public messaging all at once. The punishment hurt the victim. The spectacle trained everyone else. And if you were standing in that crowd, watching the gate rise and hearing the animal inside, the lesson was clear. Keep your head down. Obey the law. Know your place. Because in Rome, even your death might belong to the state.